Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Eachine EV100 FPV goggles. Now, I'm definitely not the first to be trying these out, and there's loads of reviews of these goggles out by now. I do have a wide selection of FPV goggles and visors myself though, so hopefully this video will still be useful to someone. So before I check out these goggles, I want to talk a little bit about the hype around them and the difference between these and the box style goggles. So I started off with box goggles because they were and are a very cheap way to do FPV, and box goggles have come on leaps and bounds with having DVRs built into them now and loads of different options. In fact, more options than the non-box goggles, I would say. But back when I was starting the channel, they were a little bit DIY, so I thought if I'm going to start taking the YouTube seriously, then I should probably invest in a pair of Fatsharks, because that is what everyone else was doing. So I got these, which are the Fatshark Dominator V2s, and to cut a long story short, I was really disappointed with them. I mean, they cost a fortune, and I think after I bought a module and the diopters for my dodgy eyesight, I was in about £400, and I thought the quality of the plastic was terrible. The image was super tiny compared to the box goggles, and I honestly thought I'd been ripped off. But because I'd spent so much money on them, I started to use them for reviews and realised that they aren't just super convenient for making YouTube videos. You see, I'd never realised the importance of a DVR until I started doing a lot of crashing, I think is the right term. And the Fatsharks have a DVR built into them. It's just this button press on the top there. And you might be thinking, well, why is a DVR so important? Well, we have a lot of bells and whistles on quadcopters these days that help us locate a lost model, such as beepers and ESC beacons, which are great if your battery stays connected. But I find that about 30% of the time the battery gets slung away, especially if you've landed in a tree. And if you are using a GoPro, those can easily eject up to about 50 meters as well. So what I'm saying is that a DVR is really important to me, and not just for recording the flight footage for my reviews. In fact, I always run a DVR whenever or whatever I'm flying, and it saved me a fortune in lost parts, especially with these micro models we have now. If I can't find a lost model, I can go into the DVR and watch the last frames of its life. Sometimes I even go back to the house so that I can blow the picture up on a big screen and see which direction the GoPro went off or where the quad landed, etc. So for me, using Fatsharks is convenient mostly because of the built-in DVR and the fact that they are lightweight and compact. So when I'm rushing around between rainstorms, then they are just there ready to go. Everything else, such as the screen size and quality compared to box goggles, is a compromise. So these types of goggles are so compact because they are using two tiny screens, one for each eye, and then optics have been used to make the image bigger. Whereas box goggles use one big screen, which is usually a repurposed monitor, and then a Fresnel lens is put in front of it to make the image massive, and I mean a lot bigger than anything you will see from these compact size goggles. So bringing it back to the EV100s, they are lightweight and compact, and they are crazy cheap, even though they've now doubled the price since the pre-orders. I think the cheapest Fatshark goggles are the Teleporter V5s, and the EV100 outdoes those on spec and price really easily. But with the lack of a built-in DVR, all it would take would be the loss of a model or a GoPro to make paying the price of the Fatsharks worth paying. That being said, there is a DVR module on the way for the Eachines, but it's a bit of a hack job. So the goggles have a video out function that means that you can attach any DVR to the goggles, which is great, but it's a little bit fiddly and not as convenient as the all-in-one solution of the Fatsharks, and I would even say the EV800D or the VRD2 Pro box goggles would be less of a hassle with them both having a DVR built into them. So with that being said, the price of these goggles is crazy good and the specs look good as well. Banggood has had over 8,000 pre-orders, I think, which is a smart move for anyone that went and pre-ordered them. And let me tell you why. You see, despite me making reviews of goggles, it's really hard to recommend a pair of FPV goggles to anyone because everyone experiences them slightly differently, and I've said this before. We all have a different shaped face and different distances between our eyes, and the compact style goggles such as these and the Fatsharks are definitely more sensitive to that. So I bought the Dominator HD V2s after the SD V2s, and I had to send them back because I could never get a clear image out of them, whereas other people would tell me that they were the best goggles ever. So I came to the conclusion that if you want to get these style goggles, then you really need to try them on first. But if you don't live near a shop or know anyone that has them, then you are a bit scuppered. And that is why the EV100 is so good, because, well, they have a more advanced optics system than the Fatsharks, which I'll get onto a little bit later. But more importantly, they are really cheap and therefore worth the risk of trying out, even if the end result is that you don't like them. Secondly, the field of view is smaller with these than Fatsharks at just 28 degrees according to the specs, and I don't think that has been done for cost or to make them cheaper. The fact is that a smaller field of view will make them more versatile to more people, unlike the Fatsharks where they have been stretching the optics to the max, which has resulted in a lot of people complaining of blurred images, and Fatshark have now started to dial that back with their field of view in their latest releases because of that. So if you are coming from the box goggles to these, then I think you're going to be really disappointed with the postage stamp size view. That being said, let's take a look at them. So this is the official released version that I have, and this is the proper box here. So in the box you get the goggles with the faceplate already attached. Now the faceplate does detach, but they aren't very comfy like this, and to this date there aren't any faceplate accessories. I think the old rubber Fatshark inserts might fit, but Fatshark did away with those some time ago, so I'm not gonna try them here. Now the foam around the surround is detachable as well, but it is placed on out of the box, whereas Fatshark they make you stick them on yourself. So this is something that Fatshark has started to do with their pads as well, because they wear really easily. In fact, I can see that this foam has 2 layers and eventually they will come apart, because that happened with my Fatsharks. So I do hope that we get some spare parts for that. Now some people are saying that the foam is too thick and that a thinner foam will give you a clearer image, and that is true depending on your face shape. The faceplate is also slightly smaller than the Fatsharks, so they aren't going to be interchangeable if you were thinking of doing that. I find them quite comfy to wear myself. However, some big heads on the internet out there have reported that they can't use them, which brings me back to the whole thing about trying stuff before you buy them and taking the risk, etc. So also in the box we have a 1000 mAh 2S battery and then 2 RPSMA dipole antennas, which I'm not going to be using in this review. Instead, I'm going to be putting a cloverleaf and patch antenna on there to try out the antenna diversity. So there is also a instruction manual with a wipe cloth to clean the lenses with, and it may also be useful for any touch cloth moments that happen while flying FPV, maybe? I don't know, what am I saying? Anyway, we also have a micro USB lead and a small Velcro strap to hold the battery in as well. So the quality of these is really good. They don't feel cheap at all, and they are definitely lighter than the Fatsharks as well. The strap is nice and it fits me with no issues. Of course, you can adjust it to your liking. So let's take a look at the top. We have a built-in fan to stop the lenses fogging up. Unlike the Fatsharks, this turns on via a switch underneath, which is quite nice, because with the Fatsharks you have to plug in the balance connector and then press a button. It's a little bit fiddly. Then we have these two buttons, which are for searching through the 8 channels of the currently selected band. So this built-in receiver supports 72 channels, which is pretty awesome, but there seems to be a lot of questions surrounding the built-in receiver and it not being true diversity. So I will say this: I've tried both true diversity and antenna diversity, and personally I can never tell the difference. Essentially, they are trying to achieve the same thing, which is taking the strongest signal from whichever antenna is receiving the best RSSI value and then sending that picture to the screens. So I guess only Eachine know if this is proper antenna diversity, and I'll only be able to comment on the reception when I do the flight test. But looking at pictures of the insides of the goggle, it looks like proper antenna diversity to me. So these buttons on the top, they have a double function, which I'm not a big fan of because I can never remember double functions. So when you plug the battery in, you'll get the band and the frequency and also the battery level displayed on the screens as well, which is displayed quite big actually. So pressing both of these buttons together takes that away, which I like because it means that you can see the rest of your copter's on-screen display if you have one. And then if you long press any of these buttons, then that switches the band, and of course there are a lot of bands with this one, with it supporting 72 channels. Then on the other side we have this joystick style button. It's very similar to the Fatshark style buttons, and this is also multifunctional. So up, down, left and right controls the brightness and the contrast of the picture, just like the Fatsharks joystick does. And then a long press in the center until you hear a single beep will set the goggles up for a 4-person race, with the idea being that it's spacing the frequencies apart so that no one overlaps with each other. Then if you long press the button again to another single beep, it will set you up for a 6-person race, and a third time for an 8-person race. Now, it's quite a nice idea, but I'll probably never use it because I'm alone. I always fly on my own. So if you long press this button again for 2 beeps, then the goggles will do an auto scan through all of the frequencies, and it does seem to land on the strongest signal as well, which is nice if you're flying on your own because it discards ghost frequencies and things like that. And lastly, if you hold the button down to a 3rd beep, then the goggle goes into AV in mode, which will then accept a signal through the 3.5mm jack on the side, but you aren't given any cables for that. And this one is also an output which you can use for an external DVR. The only thing I'll say about it though is that the picture seems to go darker when the connector makes a connection with your external device. At first I thought, well, maybe it's splitting the signal so that it sends half brightness to each output, but the picture seems fine on the DVR that it connects to, so maybe it's a software glitch. Either way, you can increase the brightness of the goggle once you are connected to your external device, but if you unplug it, then the screens will be saturated with brightness. Another thing that I've noticed as well is that every so often the screen blacks out. It's only for a brief second. I don't know if this is a glitch as well. Anyway, on the other side we have a USB connector which does power up the goggles if you use it. This is actually quite a nice idea because you could carry a power bank around with you if you want to get a lot of flying in, because the stock battery is probably only good for about 30 minutes or so. So next to that we have a 3.5mm headphone jack if you are into hearing scrambled audio from your model or copter, which I never am, so I don't bother with it. And then underneath the goggle, this is what everyone is talking about, and I have to say, this is really impressive. It's a problem that Fatsharks correct using diopters, which is essentially a prescription lens that you slide in front of the optics. And this is needed for some people because these compact style goggles require your eyes to look far into the distance. So people who are short-sighted like me just see a blurred image. So rather than using diopters, Eachine have put some wizardry, pardon the pun, which will allow the user to correct individually the lenses for their vision via these rockers underneath here. Now, this is a feature that Fatshark really need to implement, but I can't help but think that the lack of a DVR and a much smaller field of view has allowed for this technology, but time will tell in the future whether other releases will start using this technology or not. So the manual says that the lenses are just 400 degrees myoper, I think that's how you say it, which in human speak is -4, whereas the Fatsharks go up to -6, I think, so you definitely need to take that into consideration as well with your prescription. So I also suffer from astigmatism, which is not corrected with these goggles, but that doesn't seem to cause a problem with these optics, and I get a nice clear picture. As for far-sighted people, the adjustment is +1. However, I can't imagine that that is being needed. So at this point, I should say that the box goggles are not great for people who need reading glasses, because box goggles require you to focus on things close up, and the majority of them won't fit glasses wearers. So if you are long-sighted, then these might be a better option for you if you don't want to shell out on Fatsharks. Anyway, back to the goggle, and we also have IPD adjustment as well. And again, some big heads on the internet are saying that the adjustment isn't good enough, but for me, I have the adjusters at the extreme edge for both of them, and they just about line up for me. So again, it all depends on how well your eyes are put on your face. By the way, I've kept the plastic film over the eyepiece if you're wondering, and that is because I'm shoving cameras down them and I don't want to scratch the surface. So that is pretty much the goggles explained. So next, let's take a look at the battery that they give you. Now, a lot of people reported that their battery was dead when they received it. And can you see, we have a button on the top there that tells you the strength of the battery. Well, inside this case, there are actually some clever circuit boards, which is quite surprising at this price point. One of the boards has a voltage cutoff at around 3.3 volts, which doesn't let the battery over discharge, but then when it does get too low, it looks like everything is dead because nothing lights up. So all you have to do is charge it via the USB connector on the back and it will charge up fine. And there is also a balancing circuit built into this as well, which is quite a lot of redundancy for such a cheap product. And this means that there is only one method to charge the battery, and that is via the USB connector at the back. The other is a DC connector, and that is for plugging into the goggles and powering them up. And the balance type connector is not a balance port at all, and it is for plugging into a external DVR, which is yet to be released, but it's coming out shortly. And this outputs the full voltage of the battery, so I must stress, do not try to charge this battery from the balance port. Other than that, the battery fits into the strap nicely, and as I say, you should get about 30 minutes of on time with it. And the Fatshark batteries work fine with it as well. They fit nicely. So the big question is, are these goggles a Fatshot killer? Well, I think the answer is no. Now, don't get me wrong, they are great for the money, but the biggest issue with these goggles is the field of view. It's tiny, and I mean like super tiny. They say it's 28 degrees, but when you compare it to the screen size of the Fatshark models, for example, the old SDV2, which have a field of view of around 32 degrees, the EV100s look considerably smaller, even to those. By the way, ignore the picture quality in this screenshot. They were taken by a GoPro in really terrible lighting conditions. But I would say 28 degrees field of view for the EV100 is a optimistic figure. The goggles also seem to crop some of the image in both PAL and NTSC formats, and I've done a couple of tests with this. The cropping doesn't seem as bad in PAL, but if you have an on-screen display close to the bottom of your screen, then you might lose some of the info, whereas you can see the Fatsharks show it nicely. The picture quality and clarity, on the other hand, is brilliant, and you'll have no problems flying through them, I'm sure. So for me, these goggles are for long-sighted people that don't want to shell out on Fatsharks or Omways and can't go for the bigger box goggles because of their eye restrictions. Other than that, I would say to everyone else, stick with the box goggles such as the EV800Ds or the VRD2 Pros until the next version of this comes along, which no doubt after all of those pre-orders will be already in the making. So, speaking of the reception of the built-in receiver, I think it's great, just as I suspected. So you just need to get yourself some better antennas and you will get a good result out of them. I've seen some people modifying them. That's fair enough, but for me, I don't think it's needed. And seeing as there are 8,000 plus owners out there now, I imagine there's going to be a fair amount of modding that goes on with these goggles. One thing I will say though is that I think it would be very difficult to do anything about the field of view with these goggles, but this community is absolutely amazing, so I'll definitely be sat here with my popcorn waiting for some solutions. So there you go, that is my extensive review of the Eachine EV100s. I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get some, and I will leave you with some flying recorded via a external DVR. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.